Jim, I want to thank you for taking time out of a obviously extremely busy day, month, and year that you've had running IRSCI. You were kind enough a few years ago when you joined, or not joined, when you first went into role to talk to us about some of your priorities. And while we have connected over the past couple of years and with your staff as well, we haven't had a chance to catch back up with you. So what I wanted to do today is get your sense of some of the highlights and challenges that you and your agency faced in 2023, and then get your take on some of the things the AML CTF community can continue to be aware of for 2024. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
No, John, as always, thank you for all your support and for setting this up and always giving me a platform to talk about the division that I've been with for almost 29 years here, and really just to promote the great work that my team here at IRSCI is doing. And yeah, I do have some highlights for 2023. Some updated BSA data that I just hit send on. Matter of fact, you're the first person I'm really talking to about it. But let me get into some of the annual report from 2023, and this is out there and it's posted. And we posted this. Yeah, it's probably late November. And but before I get into it, I could not be more proud, of the tenacity of our special agents, our investigative and administrative analysts. I mean, we've got communication specialists, all types of personnel here within the division that make CI tick and continues to carry out, our incredibly important mission on behalf of the American public. And the stats and the outstanding case examples, I mean, they're just a testament to that dedication, which I'll probably say a couple of times. So a couple key takeaways from 23. I'll start there, and please stop me, John.
Sure, go ahead, please, yes.
Fine, but very successful year. Fiscal year 23, we identified about $36.9 billion in tax fraud and other financial crimes. That exceeded our 22 year. Number's a little bit of a misnomer. That's probably much higher, but that is the amount of fraud we identified that we recommended to DOJ for prosecution. Another highlight from the report, digital data seized. We're really tracking this now, like a lot of companies are when it comes to data. I mean, that's the world we live in. But we seized, just seizures alone, about 1.71 petabytes of digital data. And, that's equivalent to like 170 printed libraries of Congress, or kind of a new metric that I got another way to say it. It's about 11.4 billion photos uploaded on Facebook. Just a way to kind of put that in context. Seizures, we had some anomaly seizures last year that with the crypto, but we're right on pace. We again lead Treasury agencies, year in and year out. We're pretty close to the HSI, but this year we seized about $271 million. It's significant. And again, we're significant contributors to TOF year in, year out. And then something that I say every year, and anybody at an IRCI, this is probably one of our most proud of, type metrics or statistics, our conviction rate. We were north of 88%. 88% conviction rate again this year. We're usually right in that 88 to 90%. That simply means if you get in the crosshairs of an IRS special agent, it's highly probable you're going to go to jail. And that again, that's a rate that remains incredibly high in federal law enforcement.
Hey, Jim, just on that point, I think a lot of people have the misperception that the IRS goes after all sorts of individuals, regardless of whether they've committed criminal acts and tax evasion or what have you. But the 88% is a very compelling number for the obvious reasons that you understand, and that is that you are passing along to prosecutors cases that end up successful because you're not bringing cases on a mistaken filing or a late filing. These are either companies or individuals based on your agent's analysis that have intentionally, in many cases, tried to avoid paying what some call their fair share of taxes. So I think when you hear these commercials about the IRS is going to take your house and take your car and garnish your salary, what people fail to understand is the commitment that your professionals have to ensuring that when cases are brought, they're not only just serious cases, they're well crafted. So I think that's a very compelling number that, maybe your folks don't say enough, but it's up to us in the public to better understand that. So I think that's a pretty valuable metric, and I think it's important for people to appreciate.
Yeah, no, no, thank you for that. And I'm sure everybody here in the division will love hearing you say that. Because, yeah, you do understand, you got it spot on. That 88, because I think something that's important for folks to remember is, well, yes, we are the only federal law enforcement agency that can investigate and recommend federal income tax violations. But we're also the only federal agency that spends 100% of our time on financial investigations in general. So I'll bring in the Title 31 statutes and the Title 18 money laundering statutes. So that 88% is across all financial cases that we work. For tax alone, the rate's actually higher, and that is due to the professionalism that we look. Because we're not when you talk about specific, federal income tax violations, I'm not interested in people that make a mistake. I'm looking for folks that are willfully non-compliant. Now, an overwhelming majority of the public is very compliant. They're just trying to get it right, and we provide that deterrent effect, to give confidence to the American public that, those that are willfully non-compliant, there's a consequence for that, and the consequence is going to jail, and far different than paying a fine to resolve an issue.
Hey, one other quick question on the seizures. That's another compelling number. Where, in general, where do those funds go? So when you seize these assets after a successful prosecution, I know it may depend on the case, but in general, where do the funds go?
Yeah, this is probably, we could probably have a podcast just on this topic alone. But
right.
I think, generally speaking, when IRS-CI is the seizing agency, when we seize funds, we send it over to the Treasury Executive Office of Asset Forfeiture, within Treasury. And then, obviously, what happens is there is the work's not done just because you seize it. Then that asset, whether it's some type of property or vehicle or jewelry, sometimes livestock, and any type of medium, crypto, fiat currency. There's a litigation process, and once that is successful, those funds are then forfeited. Then, at that point in time, what happens is, if there are victims involved, people can make claim to that money, or we advertise it and sell it. And then, again, that fund in general helps the government. Law enforcement, specifically our division, go back and ask for portions of it, but it's fractional compared to the overall amount that we contribute every year to it.
Got it. So, yeah, go ahead with some of the other highlights.
Yeah, a couple other quick highlights. I mean, we initiated over 2,600 criminal investigations this year. About 70% of that is tax or tax related. The remaining investigations, focus on other financial crimes tied to criminal activity like narcotics, bank secrecy, and all types of predicate acts involving money laundering. And these numbers are very much in line, with prior years. Couple big successes away from my lens, for the division that had significant, domestic and international publicity. Mark Jetway, in March of 23, he was convicted of various tax violations, making false statements to the IRS, failing to disclose offshore accounts, failing to file tax returns, and in late 23, he was actually sentenced like 86 months in prison. Essentially, what this case was about is concealing ownership and control over offshore assets in excess of like $93 million. We had another significant tax investigation. It was a company, Washiki Renewable Energy. Essentially, the individuals there were making false claims for fuel excise taxes, claiming about 1.1, or actually exceeding tax credits of $1.1 billion. And, all defendants pled guilty. There was a trial which resulted in a guilty verdict. But 5 folks were sentenced, it's probably mid-2023, ranging from 72 to 480 months. Again, significant sentence. And then we had one other case, I'll mention, Ayodele Arisukan. This was out west. This was a pretty big sentence, 408 months in federal prison. Essentially what this person did is, they coordinated a scheme to file, it was just north of 1,700 false tax returns, claiming about $9 million in refunds. I think about $2 million was paid out, but it was orchestrated, just outside of Paris. So there's numerous more just like this. I work for the IRS, so I gave you some tax ones here, but I just can't say enough about, that tremendous work. I think, a lot of federal agencies are still looking at various types of COVID fraud. In 23, we were too. I think, I'm really proud of the efforts here. I think since the beginning of the pandemic, we've initiated, north of 1,400 criminal investigations. We're nearing 700 indictments. On those cases alone, there's a 98% conviction rate. So we're really making a difference, by helping ensure that money goes where it was intended to go. I think, an interesting statistic there, this is at the end of the fiscal year of 23. The average sentence imposed, we got about 300 cases as of that end of fiscal year that were actually adjudicated all the way through sentencing. The average sentence is about 3 years. So again, the judges are, it's demonstrating that judges don't take that crime lightly. I think another kind of hot topic within the IRS enterprise, and IRS criminal investigation being part of that enterprise, one thing these employee retention credits, we're in that space as well. We've initiated, it's well north of 300 investigations, for those tax years 20 through 23. We've got, about 8 of them have resulted in convictions, about 4 which have been sentenced. So we're definitely, in that space, doing our part, to help the service, promote voluntary compliance. I think another thing that your audience would be interested in, I know I've talked about our J5 international relationship in the past, and one of the things that we just did, we have for the J5, and again, for those that may not know, the Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement and other financial crimes. I mean, it's my counterparts in Australia, Canada, UK, Netherlands, US, of course. We do what we call this initiative, it's called the Challenge, okay? And it really, the importance of this and significance can't be overstated. And some of your audience may know, but those that don't, during a challenge, we sit and bring together public and private partner experts from each country. Think of like, investigators, data scientists, analysts, men and women, with very unique skill sets. They gather, with a mission of leveraging real data from a variety of open and investigative sources within each country that we're legally allowed to share. And we tell them, you need to produce results. And what I mean by results is we need to sit down and produce operational leads that impact every jurisdiction. And that's what they do. We just did the 5th one. We did it in Ottawa in October. That challenge focused on digital assets within financial institution reporting documents, which is real relevant to your audience. Right. And then public data sets revolving around digital assets. So I think the one thing that was unique this year about this public-private partnership challenge is partners from each FIU jurisdiction attended, and private partners helped out as well. Think of like these reg tech companies like Chainalysis, were part of this challenge, this year. So when I say they produce results, they did just that. They do this every time. This was the fifth one. They produced well north of 50 investigations. I'm being general with that number 50 because if I give an exact number, not all leads turn into investigations, but well north of 50 and high impact leads that have cross jurisdictional representation. Think of things like darknet marketplaces, child exploitation, pig butchering schemes. So these are all significant areas for law enforcement because they have real impacts, and not just on tax administration, but on real victims, and these are horrendous crimes. So again, very much in tune to our international partnerships. Got to have it these days, public and private. So, I guess maybe that's what I'll touch on. But it's been my humble opinion. Government can make no better investment than to invest in IRS criminal investigation special agent, because not only do we promote deterrence and confidence within the tax system, but daily we're working with our federal counterparts and spending 100% of our time on financial cases. So we really play a significant role in protecting the integrity of the entire financial system.
Hey, Jim, let me build off of your comment on partnership. So the J5 partnership, also very compelling. As you say, data scientists, folks from the reg tech industry, the fintech industry. Let's go back to sort of the basics, though, in terms of your agents partnering with traditional banks, big, small, mid-size institutions. I know from decades of working with agents that they're great at doing training with bankers, explaining through typologies and case studies what to look for. Give us a sense of that commitment. You do a ton of outreach yourself, but so do your agents. And I think it's important because certainly the BSA officer in the U.S. completely recognizes the value of IRS CI to the work they do, whether it's through SAR review teams or just simply acting on a suspicious activity report that's been submitted that your agency is working on. Give us a sense of that partnership and how it continues to evolve. It's been strong, but it continues to get stronger. And what recommendations do you have for, let's say, a brand new BSA officer for any size institution in terms of their outreach to your agency? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, this is something that again, because we're financial investigators, all financial crimes, we rely on those AML specialists out there. And I know I've said this. I've been very vocal about this. And I've actually been engaged in a lot of speaking events revolving around, that feedback loop. Let me start there, if you don't mind, John. And, again, this is that, industry, financial institutions, banks especially, have wanted that feedback loop. Why is this information? What are you doing with it? Why is it so important? For quite some time. And last year, for the 22 year, we did it for the first year. We took a crack at giving some of that feed loop, and I just sent out our updates for fiscal year 23. And what I often say, especially the AML crowd, BSA data in general, all of it. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. I've repeated that over and over and over. And it's a must have because we need it to help identify those individuals that are committing all these financial crimes, tax and other. So AML specialists are really the first line of defense here to detect illegal and suspicious activities of financial crimes. There's a lot of overlap, right, between tax and money laundering. I often say that, money laundering is tax evasion in progress. I mean, that's why we have, this broad authority over financial investigations, we have. So again, just like last year, we repeated it this year. My expectation is we're going to repeat this every year and continue it. but a team got together, looked at the data that we had, and came up with some metrics to start this feedback conversation. And so I guess let me give you some of those for 23. And again, when I say BSA filings and BSA data, I mean information from all filings. So we're talking Forms 8300, CMIR reports, all the different types of CTRs, FBARs, SARs, everything, right? So when I make some of these comments, keep in mind I'm talking about all filings. So I think in fiscal year 23, again, we actually, personnel within IRS criminal investigation conducted more than 1.9 million searches. Okay, so that's about 38,000 a week, about 165,000 a month. And I'm not shocked by that because we are financial investigators and 100% of our time is spent on financial investigations. So we're using this data. Strategic investments here in tech has really increased efficiency in reviewing BSA data, along with other data sets that we connect it with, which we're legally entitled to have. So again, a lot of use there. I think another metric that we looked at in fiscal year 23, personnel within IRSCI searched the BSA data on right around 90% of every investigation that we have in inventory. And again, that's significant, demonstrating that not only do we use the BSA data set, but we understand how important that information is to a financial investigation. Here's another, I think, a really promising, it really gives some feedback to BSA compliance, folks out there. About 13.9% of every investigation that I put into inventory during fiscal year 23 was a direct result of a BSA filing. That's all forms. That was the source of the information. And I always try to put this in context. It's significant. It's a significant part of my investigative inventory year in and year out. That's new inventory. And that can't be overstated in the context I like to give. We're a division within a very large enterprise, but we only get about 5% of our cases from the rest of the service. I've got about almost 14% this year directly from the BSA data. Basically supporting my comment that our BSA mission is a significant part of what we do. And by popular demand, or as I've been out, John, talking to folks in the AML world, they would ask me, "Hey, well, what about this? Can you give me this?" In listening, here's a couple of things that AML specialists around the country have said to myself and my leadership team and agents around the country. Of that data set, of that, roughly 14%, about 64% of that had a tax charge associated with the investigation. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean it was tax, but they had a tax charge associated with it. The remaining of it was pure money laundering, essentially. Another thing they asked, well, what kind of cases are coming out of that? So about 16.5%, almost 17% of that data set was SBA loans. There were investigations revolving some type of, a COVID fraud, an SBA loan. About 7% of that data set were skimming type investigations. About 3% were virtual currency investigations that we initiated as a result of BSA information. And another question your AML specialists out there asked me, well, what forms are you talking about? Well, in that data set, about 90% came from SARs. About 9% came from CTRs. Now you've got some very small fractions with the other forms, but that's how that data set panned out. Another interesting stat, just another way to look at information. About 87, just north of 87% of every new investigation I put into inventory had a BSA filing associated with the primary target. So this is significant and relates to all financial investigations and program areas we're responsible for. And again, that's, tax, other related financial crimes, namely, money laundering, bank secrecy, narcotics, public corruption, terrorist financing, money crimes, which is just about everything other than random acts of violence. So again, very good feedback, I'd like to say, for your AML community. And I do have a number of other stats. Maybe I'll give you one more, because this is one that a lot of folks seem to be interested in. This is really an average over the past 3 years, so fiscal year 21, 2, and 3. We found that an average about just north of 85% of every investigation that we recommend for prosecution has a primary subject with a related BSA filing. Again, this is just another data set. We're drilling down, trying to further, see, what does this mean to us? And we did drill down. And of that data set, about 40% has been completely adjudicated all the way through sentencing. And the average sentence was about 39 months, about $629 million in asset forfeiture. And again, we still have about $7.4 billion in assets seized. That was dominantly, those couple, 2 or 3 cases of digital assets. So, our goal moving forward is to continue doing a better job, feeding this feedback loop, because it's important, due to the emphasis we're putting on public-private partnerships. My plan is to have the division continue to refresh these metrics, continue to build additional metrics into this based on what we're hearing from the AML specialists and what's important then that we can actually uncover. And I got some additional, maybe I'll close this BSA part with this. We do have some additional phases coming based on listening to the feedback that we're getting. I want to challenge the IRS enterprise to come up with similar metrics. We have a BSA section with the enterprise. I want them to come up with some metrics. I want to compare, the average time it takes to complete a case during an investigation that had BSA data available versus one that didn't. See if I can learn anything there. I think it's an easy fix. It's manual, but I can come up with this relatively quickly in future phases. I want to talk about the types of financial institutions making these impactful filings.
I think I hate to interrupt on that one. I think that's important because some of the misconceptions has been, okay, traditional banks do what they have to do, in part because they know they have to, but also because there's regulators overseeing it. But fintechs and MSBs, they have obligations as well. And then I'm personally hoping we'll eventually see antiquities dealers having some requirements to file BSA data, art dealers. So I think doing a statistical analysis of where it's coming from is actually going to both be a good advocacy tool for those of us that think more, real estate, investment advisor, you name it, right? There's so many that have financial footprints that I would argue are not, they're not pulling their weight in the anti-financial crime space. So I would say, Jim, that would be welcome metrics if you can get that started.
No, I love it, and I'm writing that down as we speak. And think about we're gonna break down the SARS. Looking at the most helpful boxes being checked and giving that feedback to financial institutions. Look, I think we may learn something about specific to banks. The size of the bank. Can we see if it's the top 15 banks or smaller banks making the majority of these filings and major geographic themes, SARS being selected, in are they being selected in big financial centers? Are they spread throughout the U.S.? I mean, we have this data.
Right.
It's just a lot of it's a manual process, so it takes time, effort, and resources. But we're going to do it, and we're going to continue to listen to those AML specialists out there, for this type of feedback. I've got a running list. I could go on, but I think I'll close on that piece with I just want to thank all of those AML specialists for all the hard work. This data is critical to financial investigators and financial investigations within IRS Criminal Division, and I'll speak for my other federal counterparts as well. And I know in confidence they'd say the same thing. So it's definitely just as important to them, and it's a huge part of our success. So a giant thank you to all you folks out there helping out. So I appreciate that. I think that's so important. Let me get you out of here on this, and I know we could go for a while, but just quickly, what do you see as the continued or maybe new challenges for
anti-financial crime practitioners for 2024, both within your agency, but also in the private sector? I mean, I know we're going to have to deal with, cybersecurity issues and obviously continued fraud, sadly, because that never seems to abate at all. But what do you see as some of the priorities, both for the agency, but also for our community going forward?
Yeah, great question, and I will let me give you a couple of thoughts. And this is relatively hot off the press. The U.S. Treasury Department's announced the launch of a new counter-fentanyl strike force to combat the trafficking of illicit fentanyl, into the country. And this new strike force is actually being chaired by the Undersecretary of Treasury, Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, TFI, and myself here at IRSCI. So this strike force, this Treasury strike force, is going to allow us to bring, really the Treasury Department's, unrivaled expertise in fighting financial crime to address this deadly epidemic. And I think Secretary Yellen made a comment very similar to that, if not right on point. We're going to use every tool at our disposal to help disrupt the ability of drug traffickers to peddle this, in our country. So think about what's really going to do is bring together personnel, expertise, intelligence across Treasury, IRS being a bureau of the Treasury Department, but other key units as well that specialize in financial crimes. So we got IRSCI, we got FinCEN, we got OFAC, the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Office of Terrorist Finance and Financial Crimes. We're gonna come together and bring all of our resources together to help fight this epidemic. So much more to come on that, because I do have some ideas within the division here to help get our private partners to help us out there. So more to come on that. I think sanctions are still out there, John, as you know.
Sure.
We've recently, well, not recently. I mean, we've identified shell companies, both foreign and domestic, that facilitate sanctions evasion. And what we're seeing, in the avionics and electronics industries, especially, and some of the international, the overseas companies, they never touched U.S. soil, but through correspondent banks, we're able to identify or trace these transactions. But it's slow and it's cumbersome. So I guess in that sanction space too, I mean, obviously, we are leading the way in our digital asset investigations, and we've identified and targeted, crypto wallets that fundraise terrorist organizations like Hamas. We working closely with other treasury agencies and OFAC, take action there. It's as evidenced by some of the stuff that's out in the public. Information provided by financial institutions is critical here, though.
Sure.
Especially such as U.S. persons who donated there. You got the beneficial ownership database out there that kind of impacts all of us, right? Depending on where you sit. I mean, that information, I feel is going to be critical to law enforcement. I think it's implemented. Full usability of that beneficial ownership data. I mean, it's not expected right away, but we're working through that. But I think that's going to be critical for us. I think the other thing, probably for the AML community, and something that's on our mind, and I'm going to be asking for help with, when you talk about scams, like think about like romance schemes, elder fraud abuse. These types of schemes create like unwitting money mules, and that continues to be on the rise. And again, that sophistication coupled with digital assets and encrypted communication, it continues to present challenges in law enforcement, and I suspect and know actually within the financial industry. So we're addressing these challenges through increasing investments in data analytic tools and other investigative techniques. But this is where collaboration with our financial partners is invaluable. So,
yeah. So I think yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to close, but go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, I know that the community would welcome you to reach, or your folks to reach out, because they want to continue to work with you on all these topics, and these things are also so important to society in general. But go ahead, go ahead and close.
I think, boy, you hit it spot on, and I was going to close with something very similar. I mean, even getting back to the importance of BSA data, there's a need in all these areas for continued due diligence with the bank filings, in an effort to help law enforcement root out bad actors, all in an effort to help make the American public safe. So I'll leave you with this, John. It's going to be critical for law enforcement to focus on partnerships, around the globe, especially in a public-private partnership setting, just to keep pace with fraudsters out there trying to take advantage of people. And my division here at IRS Criminal Investigations fully embracing public-private partnerships. In fact, we know and understand that nobody in law enforcement can be successful these days without embracing PPPs. We all know it. And so, the more we embrace it and devote time and resources to, cultivating those partnerships, the more successful we're going to be. And that's why you see, so many of my folks and leadership around the country out at all these events, just trying to establish, strengthen, and maintain, these critical partnerships with private industry, specifically the financial institutions. So, John, thank you so much.
Jim Lee, Chief IRS CI, thank you again so much for what you and your agency do, your work with everybody within the AML community. You are looking at metrics, giving us the feedback that becomes necessary to ensure that people realize what we know, and that is the data does get used, reviewed, and analyzed. And that's also a message that we in the private sector need to continue to mention. I've sort of kidded my friend, and you know him too, Steve Gerdak, who's part of the Northern Virginia SAR review team. I said we should have buttons made that say SARs do get read, because of all the things that you do. So, Jim, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and especially sharing with us the update on the BSA data challenge that you've given to your agency. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you hot off the press. You got it, John. Thanks for your time.